the picture tells the story. This is China. And what I heard was that this was the shop of a Chinese woman who did so much business, or who does so much business with the Igbo people, that she decided to honor this nation that brings her so much business. The shop is in China. The other version is that the shop belongs to an Igbo person who is based in China. Well, we are not surprised. We shouldn't be surprised if an Igbo owns this. Even though I would have preferred the Igbos to be manufacturers, but as our people say, the vicissitudes of life, the travails of life, have placed the Igbos where they are today, the store owners. And till date, they are still doing a good job of it, even though there is a lot of room for improvement, because the engine room of this success in what we colloquially call buying and selling. The proper name is not buying and selling, but retailing. The engine room is Eba Odibo. The Igbo apprenticeship tradition, peculiar only to the Igbos and related people, which is the engine room of what you are seeing, is fraying because it is not respected, it is not nurtured. People who don't really understand it have come up and claimed that it is being studied in Harvard. It cannot be studied in Harvard. The only places it can be studied in are the stores and houses of the Igbo people. And then if they need theoretical basis, they should engage with Omenala defenders. If I am too busy, I will deputize up to 5 leaders in Omenala defenders to point out to them the tradition in the scriptures of Israel, the Hebrew Bible. It's a tradition that Jacob practiced. It's a tradition that only people who came out of the Israelites can practice, because you cannot practice it if you don't have the Omona tradition. If you don't have the Madiana tradition, you cannot practice it. But this is only a repeat. We are repeating what we did with China. We are repeating what we did with Japan. The Igbo people helped Japan rebuild from the ashes of World War II. Igbo businessmen built an air bridge between Africa and Japan from the 1950s to my own time in the 80s. I saw this bridge still standing by the 1980s when I had grown into adolescence. Thousands of Igbo businessmen were frequenting Japan to buy things and sell. What I just illustrated should be studied in Japanese universities, should also be studied in American universities. But unfortunately, as Igbos, we have not nurtured a maintenance culture, a culture of maintenance. Until Omenala defenders came up, we have not maintained things. But to be truthful, I'm a little bothered by anti-Igbo hatred. Why am I bothered by anti-Igbo hatred? Everybody is shouting anti-Semitism, 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 anti-Semitism. The Igbos do not suffer less from anti-Semitism than the Jews. Unfortunately, the Igbos are identified with the dark continent. And nobody cares about what happens to people that are linked to the dark continent. Otherwise, the people that are tracking anti-Semitism would have seen that As people have risen up against the Jews, so have people risen up against the Igbos. If you want to become famous, if you are from Nigeria or anywhere else, all you have to do is to look for one lie and tell against the Igbos now. That's the quickest way to become famous and popular. Criticize the Igbos. Incite people against them, and you become famous. But as I said, the Jews are in the news because they are identified with the part of the world which people pay attention to, Europe or, quote, white. So, a lot of these things that are said about the Igbos are hate speech. And you know the unfortunate thing, Igbos sometimes take those things as really relative to them, take those things as true, and begin to turn those things against them. I will give you an example that will stand up and walk. One social media rock star, not a scholar, not an intellectual, began to ventilate on Igbo history and culture. He's not a historian, he's not a scholar, he's not an intellectual, he is not a historian of the Igbos, he is not even a historian of his own ethnicity in Kenya. But he has used social media to gain some attention in the world. He came and began to teach the Igbo people their history. And his reasons are not without malignity. His reasons are malign. Anytime you begin to teach the Igbos that they did not come from Israel or that the Jews came from them, you are trying to confuse them. They did not come from the Jews did not come from them, but you are obviously envious that their ancestors wrote the Bible you are reading. So you are trying to convince them to rise against their heritage so that you will be their equal or superior to them. But because the Igbos have suffered genocide for so long, anybody that pretends to tell them anything that places them at a level they consider high, they will see the person as a hero. Like some clowns rose up some years ago and convinced the Igbos that the Igbos existed before human beings were created. They became heroes to the Igbos. Even though anybody with any knowledge of any kind of history would have known that these people were clowns. Because the basis of their claim that the Igbos were older than everybody in the world was on a critique of the biblical story of Adam. And by the way, Adam means human being, but they assumed that Adam was a particular individual who was an Israelite. So based on that, they said that the Igbos are older than the Israelites. They did not know that the biblical writers were simply using a myth to tell the story of humanity. Adam represented humans. But these people ended up heroes of the Igbos. And why I tell you that I hate that I'm a little bit bothered by false stories about Igbos is that Igbos take these false stories as true and begin to use them against themselves. That is a fact. But what bothers me more is the self-hate of Igbos for themselves. But again, I understand why the self-hate exists. PTSD. The Igbos have suffered genocide non-stop for 100 years. Non-stop genocide for 100 years. When the physical genocide stops, the cultural genocide continues. The seed was planted during colonial times. If you want to get the proper context, read Things Fall Apart with understanding. After reading Things Fall Apart, if you may, get this. You will begin to see what Achebe tried to write as literature. You will begin to see it as history and anthropology. With the ongoing healing being carried out by God's grace, the reconnection to authentic Omenana, the Igbo people will rise again. Omenana Defenders is doing a lot of work. The Igbo people will rise again. Will rise as one of the world's greatest force for good. For context, I don't know many Africans, Middle Easterners, Asians, even Europeans that rose up as individuals, left their villages in the 1950s. I repeat, I don't know how many Europeans, Middle Easterners, Asians, Africans, and Europeans, I repeat, who were able to leave their home territories as individuals without government backing to move to other parts of the world to do business in the 1950s. I want to be told about those Europeans, Africans, Middle Easterners, and Asians. But Igbos did it. They were intrepid. They were fearless. They carried good to other lands in the 1950s. I'm not one of those clowns that will say that Igbos did it 1 million years ago. Igbos, as Igbos, with their identity IGBOS, we are not existing. 3,000 years ago. 3,000 years ago, the Igbos were existing as Hebrews or Israelites or Ibiri. They call themselves Ibiri, Ibiriachi and Ibirinta. But as IGBO, trace the history back 1,500 years. And by the way, they are among the oldest groups in Nigeria. Some Nigerians came to Nigeria 300 years ago. The Igbos have been in the territory called Nigeria for over 1,500 years. Henry Kissinger said the Igbos were westernized in 1968 because he thought their civilization was as advanced as European civilization. But we know that it was more advanced. Their civilization was more advanced than the European civilization because use one metric alone to get the facts. While the European civilization had developed representative democracy, Igbo democracy is participatory. Everybody must be listened to. Everybody must speak. Everybody's opinion must be factored into the decision. Well, with subjection to total genocide, which when it paused was replaced by cultural genocide, the Igbo people no longer remember who they are and whom they could be, so they do not know the value of their history. That is why I make the efforts I make to tell their stories. Like, look at the story I just told. This story should be told all over the world. If the Japanese are reminded that as the Allied powers, particularly America, did so much to revive Japan, to help Japan to recover from Nagasaki and Hiroshima, that Igbos contributed. This makes more sense than for the retrogrades, to rise up and begin to say that Igbos existed before humans existed. This makes Igbos laughing stock. This makes Igbos a people without identity. Because if you claim that Igbos existed 3 million years ago, what culture would they use to organize their present and their future? If you begin to lie that they did not come from Israel, even though you cannot make any convincing case that Igbos did not come from Israel, because if they did not come from Israel, why do they call their culture and religion Omenana? As far as I know, the Hebrew Bible contains the inescapable fact that the religion and culture of the Israelites was called the way you will do in the land. Translate the way you will do the land to the Igbo language, you have Omenana. And some of these retrogrades have come up again and said that the Igbos have different origins. But as I wrote today on my Facebook timeline, these branches that say that Igbos have different origins, they should tell us why the Igbos have one fate. And that fate is persecution, oppression, endless losses and defeats. And this has been the fate of the most prominent branches of the people of Israel, the Ashkenazi primarily and the Sephardi secondarily. If the Igbos have different origins, why do they have one fate? Why have they, as a people, been uniformly marginalized and persecuted? Why have they all suffered genocide? Have a good day and join us as we respect Igbo history. Thank you.